Good morning. My name is Barton Morris. This is Jennifer Domain. We're lawyers from the Cannabis Legal Group, and this is our 64th episode of Cannabusinesses Live that we're presenting on Facebook Live. And we appreciate everybody who tunes in to listen to us. Hopefully we provide you with some good, helpful information to assist you in the cannabis industry. And thank you actually for continuing to view. I know that there's many of you who have continue to tune in and check out our YouTube channel and look at old videos, and we appreciate all of that stuff. It means your participation. We also appreciate your questions and your suggestions, your comments, and forwarding this to others who may think that would like it. In particular, I would appreciate if you would provide us with any suggestions that you would like to hear about in future episodes, because we're always interested in what people want to hear about and what they want to learn about, and so that's what we want to provide you. One suggestion that I would have, though, is when providing me a question, like through our Facebook page or just through email, remind me that this is going to be used, or you want me to use it on Facebook Live, because I got a couple of questions from people recently. They just asked me some questions, and I said, hey, I didn't realize that they actually were making suggestions, and even though I did ask for them, and I appreciate that you provided it, I didn't realize that you were making a suggestion for the show. And so then I just started answering the question, but so we appreciate that. Next thing I wanted to mention is that we are having another seminar. It'll be our 10th seminar, I believe. It'll be held at Cobo Hall on October 11th. It's going to be on cannabis licensing and compliance, business licensing and compliance. We are, it's a great lineup. We have lawyers from, of course, Cannabis Legal Group, but also from Vicente Cederberg, our law firm, a partner law firm in Colorado. And we're going to be presenting on a lot of great topics, including compliance, which regulatory compliance, which is super important, municipal issues with respect to applications and licensing for municipalities. We're going to be talking about labor and employment law at the seminar and today. And also, I think it's important that I tell you that we got a confirmation from Andrew Brisboe, who's the director of the Bureau of Medical Marijuana Regulation from the Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, and he has agreed to come to the seminar. And we're going to have a discussion with him as well. He's going to talk about updates with respect to the application process, where we are at that particular point anyway. We're going to talk about things that licensees can do in order to maintain regulatory compliance. And we're going to talk about any questions that attendees have. So that is going to be cool. It's going to be great. The whole program is going to be great. I guarantee it, because they just keep getting better, and that's why we keep going back to Cobo Hall. That's where we've done the last 3 or so. All right, so I'm going to stop talking here and move on to employment law, unless I forgot anything else. Yeah, all right, so let's talk about labor and employment law, which is a very, very, very important topic. What I want to do is to try to shift our focus on less licensing, but more on issues that are going to be necessarily dealt with by those that are obtaining a license. And it's pretty sure every single business that is going to be getting licensed is going to have employees, and many of them are going to have a lot of employees. And there are a lot of laws, federal and state laws, that have to be complied with, but there are also a lot of good business practices. So the first business practice that we were going to talk about is employee handbooks. Jennifer, do you have, first of all, employee handbooks, I think are not necessarily required. They're not going to be required, but certainly highly suggested. Do you care to discuss why?
Absolutely. So the employee handbooks are one of those documents that you don't need to operate a business, but you definitely want, because not only will you be giving some clear guidance to your employees on what your expectations are, it also will protect you from having issues moving forward. So a big issue with running a business is minimizing your liability, right? And so you not only have liability from products product liability, but you also have liability from your employees. If they're not happy, you could run into wrongful termination claims. You could run into issues with sexual harassment. The number of issues you could run into are just through the roof. And a handbook will protect you. It'll tell your employees that this is an at-will employment contract, if that's something that you want to put in there. And it'll also tell your employees the clear policies that you have in place. This way, if they violate them, you have a very clear provision that you can point to saying, you violated my policy, and so I have to let you go. That also protects you from unemployment, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, let's talk about that. Unemployment, what we're talking about, if you fire an employee, that employee, if they were full-time and if they're entitled to it, they're generally going to apply for unemployment benefits. And if they do so, and they have the right to do so, but they don't necessarily have the right to those benefits. But if they are given benefits, the employer is going to have to incur additional insurance. So like an unemployment insurance, they're going to incur like an additional cost. And so in order to avoid that, if you have a disciplinary policy, like so for instance, an employee has continually violating the rules, and if you don't have them in writing in your employee handbook, then you don't really have rules that they could violate because you haven't put everybody on notice. So, but if they're continually violating the rules that you have, that everybody should have because you're operating a business, and those violations are documented and they're dealt with, and they've been given an opportunity to fix them, but yet they don't, then they can be fired for cause. And then when they apply for unemployment, then the claim is going to be much less strong because that's what they're going to ask for. The Unemployment Insurance Administration is going to ask for, well, was this was it for cause? Was it because of some disciplinary action? Was it documented? Was it pursuant to a policy? Yeah, that's one big issue. What about like the use of marijuana at a facility, right? This provides a lot of other issues, and it brings up a lot of other issues. So what do you think about like the importance of putting that into an employee handbook?
So in the cannabis industry, it might seem kind of silly to put in at first a drug-free policy into your employee handbook. I mean, that is the actual industry. But I still think that it is going to be very, very important to put some sort of drug policy in your employee handbook for a variety of reasons. First, just because you may be inclined to allow the use of marijuana by your employees doesn't mean that you are okay with them using all different sorts of drugs like cocaine or meth. You definitely want to put some sort of protection in there for yourself to make sure that your employees aren't coming in on a cocaine bender. So we definitely want something to kind of protect you there. We also want to make sure that your employees are doing their jobs responsibly. So what I mean by that is we don't want to see employees who are coming in and their ability to perform their job has been impacted by their use of marijuana while at work. If that's something that is concerning to you, I would highly suggest that you put something into your employee handbook that explains what your policy is and what your process is for handling violations.
This is going to be very important with respect to federal and state law regarding the Occupational Safety and Health Administration guidelines. This is every employer has the obligation to ensure that their employees are operating or are working in a safe environment. And that includes ensuring that their fellow employees are not intoxicated by marijuana or alcohol. I'm not trying to say, first of all, that we believe that those that are using marijuana are automatically going to be using other drugs. I do not subscribe to the gateway theory, especially for marijuana, potentially for alcohol, but it is something that you can't ignore, right? We have to understand that people will potentially use other mind-altering substances, especially if there's no specific guideline with respect to using it and making sure that they don't use it while at work. So that is one of the guidelines that is enumerated by the OSHA. You have to provide a safe working environment, which means you can't have people that are intoxicated or even impaired by the use of marijuana. It simply just causes a problem. I mean, it's going to cause a problem with respect to those that are impaired. Now, some people can use marijuana and not be impaired. I totally agree. I know that there's a bunch of people saying that, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's okay to use marijuana while at work, you know? And I think that it's reasonable to say that, or reasonable to believe that an employer, it's reasonable to expect an employer would want their employees to be at top mental performance when running their business. Plus, it's just not a good look to patients and customers that come in and they're looking for advice that is going to be provided by these employees. What else should go in an employee handbook?
I would suggest that, well, first of all, certainly the federally mandated laws that need to go in there, or state mandated laws like the FMLA or the OSHA requirements, those we absolutely need to make sure are going into the employee handbooks. I also would like to see policies in there regarding sexual harassment, especially after this Me Too movement. You definitely want something in there to protect yourself. I think that a lot of issues that I see with employee handbooks are where you just have one avenue for reporting an issue. And if your only avenue is to report it to your supervisor, but it's the supervisor you might have an employee having an issue with, then they might not feel like they can come to that supervisor. So I would recommend that you put in 2 avenues for reporting an issue. This way you can say, well, if you didn't report, well, you had 2 avenues, so why didn't you feel comfortable? And that'll kind of protect you moving forward. So those are the 2 big things that I would really suggest you put into your employee handbook.
I think that that's absolutely huge as far as putting something in an employee handbook about not sexually harassing employees, right? Now, of course, everybody should know that, but a lot of people don't realize what is sexual harassment. You know, like they don't. Maybe it should even it definitely should be defined, because even just the talk of anything related to sex in the area that others people are listening can be sexual harassment. You never know how it's going to be perceived by somebody. Even if you think that you're completely being innocent and you're just kidding around, others may not find it to be funny, or they may find it to be offensive, and then there could be a claim. When there is a policy that just basically, especially is like there's no tolerance for it, that's what's going to be necessary in order to protect all of your employees and to ensure that everybody feels as though that they're in a safe working environment and that they're not going to be subjected to that. That's really, really important. It should not be overlooked. This is the precise reason why these types. That's what we're talking. That's why we're talking about this. This stuff has to be in somewhere. And again, there doesn't necessarily have to be. You don't have to have an employee handbook, but when you start off with one and then you can continue to build upon it, and it's going to be a valuable resource. Brad asked a couple questions, and thank you. First, Brad, yes, I agree, Jennifer's great, but don't worry, Travis and Nick, they're great too, and they're not going anywhere. So, but also Brad asked about using cannabis in your vehicle. So that raises a couple issues to me. First of all, if you're talking about using it during work, listen, it's up to the employer. If the employer wants to allow cannabis use during work, that's I wouldn't say it's advisable, but it's up to the employer. Similarly, an employer cannot allow cannabis use at all, right? Like even outside of work. Let's talk about that real quick. No, before we get to that, let's talk about the other part of this question. Can you use it in a car? That's illegal, right? Using cannabis in a vehicle under any circumstances is literally illegal. Why? Even if you're parked and nobody's around and nobody's like looking at you, the law is in the state of Michigan and like all over the country is that this vehicle, unless it's parked like on your private property where there's not a reasonable expectation that somebody else may come and see it, it's unlawful. We can only use, I should say we, people, users, patients can only use cannabis in private locations. In a vehicle that is even parked in a parking lot, that's not lawful. There's case law on that, and even in the parking lot of a dispensary, it should not be unlawful. I mean, it should be unlawful, but it's definitely unlawful. Okay, which is a whole other question about like social use and like public use, and that's coming on another episode. But I think what I alluded to was the fact that because we have medical marijuana in this state, because we are hopefully going to have adult use of marijuana initiative, does that mean that employers have to allow the use of marijuana, right? Either off-site, or meaning off hours, or during work? And the answer to that question is tell them.
Employers do not have to allow the use of marijuana, even though it's recreationally legal. They can't use your medical use of it against you if there's a drug policy if you have your card. But you cannot expect an employer to just be okay with your recreational use of marijuana because it's recreational, or just because you have your card. So it's completely up to the employer and their policies, and you have to respect that.
An employer can literally say, justifiably so, that they don't want their employees using cannabis ever. Same thing with cocaine. So not that I'm comparing the two, but they can say that. The same thing with alcohol. If they didn't want their employees ever using alcohol, they could choose to do that. Now, why is that probably not the case? It's because alcohol has been so indoctrinated in our society, and it's been so permitted, and since the end of prohibition, alcohol has been just a regular part of our society. So there's not very many people that are prohibiting the use of alcohol. But marijuana, completely different, right? Now, that being said, I find it to be significantly interesting as some news that I read recently about Canada. In Canada, and a lot of people know that the entire country has legalized the adult use of marijuana. The federal Canadian law enforcement agency I think it's called the Canadian Mounted, what is it called? I'm sorry, I forgot.
I just call them Mounties.
They have, I think they're instituting a policy where they're going to allow their police officers to use marijuana off duty. This is, I think, a huge development. It's a huge development because it signals what many people believe should be the case. It's going to be similar to alcohol. Most companies, even governmental agencies, don't preclude the use of alcohol off duty, right? And so I think a lot of people would agree that cannabis is no more dangerous than alcohol. It's much less dangerous than alcohol. So it makes no sense why employers would preclude the use of cannabis off duty when they would allow the use of alcohol off duty. Now that has been recognized by a federal agency of the country of Canada, not only by a federal agency with regard to their employees and governmental employees, but their law enforcement governmental employees. That's amazing news, and if hopefully we can learn from that. Now, our federal government is far from not only that they're not going to do anything like that, but we can't even get them to engage in the significant reform necessary to be able to deschedule cannabis. But I think we're getting there, and that's another conversation. Any comments about that?
Just that I think that there's going to be a significant distinction between the using cannabis in Canada when you are on call versus when you're off duty. If you're on call, you're not going to see their federal law enforcement officers being able to use cannabis because they're still expected to be able to perform their job duties if that event became necessary. But I think that it is not only noteworthy, but it is huge for Canada to really push the recreational, not encourage the recreational use, but to come out and state openly that they are okay with their federal law enforcement agencies to allow the use of cannabis in their off hours.
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you. Oh, sorry, there's another Jennifer.
There's another Jennifer. I saw that. I was like, hi, I'm sitting right next to you.
She's my friend from college. All right, so that's funny. All right, let's next talk about, briefly, because we're running out of time, employee training. I think that listen, first of all, every business is going to be able to have to train their employees, right? I mean, like cultivation facilities, processing facilities, that you can't even work in these facilities without some type of training. Now, that training could be real unofficial and kind of goes, okay, this is how you do your job, now go, right? Or it could be really like comprehensive training. Like for instance, in a dispensary, there's going to be obviously your bud tenders, or however you want to call them, patient, technician advocates, or people that are going to be advising the patients that are coming into the facility, and then talking to them about what selection of cannabis products that they're interested in. I think this is significantly important to ensure that they're properly trained for a lot of different reasons. And as I think actually Jennifer was talking about earlier, the importance of ensuring that their training, this particular training, is consistent across the board and across like multiple facilities, which she can talk about in a second. I particularly I wanted to talk about this, that there's some people that cannot get high on edibles. This is true. I think my wife is one of them. She there's some people that simply just cannot use edibles, right? And because nothing happens to them. Now, have you heard that before?
I have heard that.
Yeah, this is a true thing, and I think that it has something. Well, I know it has something to do with something called in our bodies called a P450 enzyme, and this enzyme literally prohibits those that do not have it from getting high. So, or from getting medical benefit, not just getting high. So if your employees don't know that, then somebody comes into your facility and says, I keep on using these edibles, they don't work, right? And then they try to give them another edible, and that doesn't work. And if these employees don't know this type of thing, then that's doing your patients and customers a significant disservice, right? Because you're continuing to give them things that aren't working, especially for medical patients. This is super important. Potentially, there's other forms or routes of administration that would work and potentially need to be explored. So that's what I'm talking about. The people need to be properly trained. What do you think?
Absolutely. And so not only is it important to have a training on patient education and keeping up to date on the different types of cannabis that you're working with, but also, I mean, it's going to be important that you properly train your employees on how to stay compliant with the regulations. There's going to be it's so highly regulated with the point of sale system. You're going to want to make sure that your employees know their point of sale system and how to correctly, input things, make sure that everything stays good with the state systems. We also want to make sure that not only will you have regulatory compliance and patient education training, but you're also going to want to have your just general business training. You're going to want to make sure that you have training on how to deal with customer service. You're going to want to make sure that your employees understand, if you need a sexual harassment training, you should probably have one. All of these things are going to protect your business moving forward, and they're going to pay dividends. So it might seem kind of silly to have this up front, but one more thing I really want to push is when you have a training or you give a handbook out, you have to make sure that those employees are going to sign something saying that they attended or that they received it and they understand it, because then you can just point to that signature if there's an issue moving forward and say, you got it, you understood it, I don't see what the issue is here. And so that is going to be huge. So just because you're going to do all of these things, you're going to give out a handbook, you're going to have SOPs, you're going to have trainings, doesn't mean that you're protected. You want to make sure that they're acknowledging receipt of those as well.
Brad asked a good question, like who is going to provide this training, right? And there are different sources. If the employer doesn't have that training themselves, meaning that they are able to provide it themselves, then there are other resources. There's companies that have been here in Michigan that have provided training, particularly to bud tenders. I think one was called like Hemp Staff. But there's plenty. I would, if I was an operator, I would find it to be very effective to literally send my employees to another state where the amount of training might be more available. It's out there, right? And there's actually training online, just like where you could take a course online, like an educational college course. You can take an educational cannabis course online as well. I've had plenty of my clients come and talk to me about that. the training opportunities are definitely available. And so I would strongly encourage it. Jackie's talking about compliance. That is actually the very next thing that I was going to talk about, is the importance of regulatory compliance. This is a significant issue. People in the industry talk about the fact that it's compliance. Number one issue that needs to be addressed. And in order to maintain regulatory compliance, it's important that the employees are properly trained. That's one of the topics that we're going to have at our seminar, is regulatory compliance. Somebody from Vicente Cedarburg, Jordan Wellington, is going to be here, and he's going to talk about the importance of it, how to maintain it. There's a lot of companies that have a compliance officer, somebody that's literally like their 100% job in order to maintain and exercise compliance. There's law firms like us. We will have a compliance department where you can come and you can get us to provide third-party audits of your business using the Simplify software, which we're authorized to use, so that we could come into your business and we can provide you a governmental simulated third-party audit to the degree to which, and it can be random, so that you can say, all right, everything is up to code and up to regulations, and if there's not, then we can take the actions necessary to make sure that it is, because a loss of a license or a temporary closure of a license, penalties, these are the things that will close a business, and these are the things that, like, it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it to make sure that your employees are doing the right thing. And there's, as you should know, there's a significant amount of regulations, and there's more and more and more every month. Every month they're coming out with new stuff. All right, well, so the last couple of minutes that we have, I wanted to talk about, you want to talk about any recent developments with the department?
With Laura?
Yeah.
So we kind of touched on this last week as well, but there's been a lot of really big changes that have kind of come down from Lara as well as the Michigan Court of Claims in the last 2 weeks. So Lara issued an advisory bulletin last week stating that if you were a temporary operator and you did not submit a Step 2 application by June 15th, then you had to shut down by the end of the week, which would have been last Friday. And you had to, if you continued to operate, they would consider that negatively when they were reviewing your licensure application. So that was huge, because at the time, around June 15th, they didn't advise that that was the way they were going to be treating that date, right? They just said that they were going to be extending the deadline to September 15th. And so there was really no discussion about this date will remain significant, because you have to have your Step 2 application in by this point in time in order to continue operating as a temporary operator. So for the department to kind of retroactively state, well, that date actually is significant, and it is going to be the deadline, the cutoff.
Not fair.
It's not fair. So we had an issue with that, but then I believe that there was a court of claims case that came out, and that basically turned that on its head, right?
Right, and we thank the attorneys that did that. It was who was the lawyer?
Denise Pelicho.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Denise, for doing that. It's been a huge benefit to a lot of our clients and a lot of operators, and so that's significant development, significant news for people in the industry and for patients. All right, we're going to finish, although I want to answer Steve's question. Steve and Anthony asked about minority opportunities in the industry and like other states are doing. And this is, we're going to do another episode on this, the entire episode on this particular issue. But I want to just briefly state that there are other states, particularly California and Massachusetts, that are providing programs to ensure that those that have been underrepresented or disproportionately affected, like African Americans and other minorities and women, that they're included within the industry and provided opportunities like training and other preferential opportunities to ensure that there's more diversity. That is not in our Medical Marijuana Act nor the Medical Marijuana Facilities Licensing Act, but it will be, and it is included in the adult use initiative. And so the Coalition to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol, I should remind everybody to get out and vote for that on November 6th. This is significantly important. Nobody can complain if you didn't vote. If we don't win, that's something that is really important, right? It is in that initiative. It is in that language that areas that have suffered disproportional penalties because of our draconian controlled substance laws over the past 50 years, there will be a program to address it. It hasn't been specifically identified. The law hasn't even been passed yet, but something that I will seek to include myself on as well, because that's something that means a lot to me. I just did a presentation about that to the National Cannabis Bar Association. So, and I'm happy to talk about that or anything else outside of this show. You can reach me at my email at barton@cannabis-legal-group.com. You can reach us through Facebook. You can come to our seminar. That's on October 11th at Cobo Hall. And we are going to have some type of networking event after as well. So like for all of our attendees, we're going to invite Mr. Brisboe, Director Brisboe as well. And it's going to be a great event. And we're also familiar with the Cannabis Aid event as well. It's going to be, I think, October 30th, 31st. We're going to be talking to them about potentially, having some type of synergy with them, so that potentially we can be included in their event. They can be included in ours. We are totally about being involved in our industry and supporting others that are doing so as well. So before we sign off, I just want to say thank you so much for your questions. Keep them coming. You guys make this podcast even better. So thank you so much for your interaction. We really, really appreciate it. Yeah, thank you. See you next time.
Bye.